To better understand the current state of modern-day media manipulation, we must first look at the father of propaganda, Edward Bernays. His influence on the 20th century rivaled that of his uncles, Sigmund Freud, as Bernays pioneered the idea of crowd psychology with Freud's psychoanalytical ideas in what would become a new political ideal on how to control the masses. In his 1928 book, Propaganda, Bernays wrote, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it." He called it the engineering of consent and proposed that those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. It was Bernays who introduced the corporate giants to crowd psychology methods and polished techniques to manipulate society. He convinced the population to buy on impulse things they didn't even need by linking mass-produced goods to their own unconscious desires. The tobacco industry hired Bernays to persuade women to take up smoking, and the Alcoa Aluminum Company asked him to drive the campaign for the national fluoridation of our water supply. A consumerist culture was born, and the U.S. government took notice. In addition to famous corporate giants, Bernays also began working for the federal government. They adopted his technique of manufacturing ever-present dangers and then maintaining a constant state of fear to give those in power greater control of what Bernays called the mass mind.
Edward Bernays, who's the father of modern advertising and propaganda, he literally wrote the book Propaganda. Joseph Goebbels, on record, the Nazi propaganda minister, used a lot of his information and twisted it to his own designs. Bernays was the chief psychological warfare expert for more than 20 years, advising the Department of War. He advised them to call it defense. Don't be honest anymore. Call it the Department of Defense, because you're actually going to run giant imperial slaughter operations.
Speak the truth.
Speak the truth.
Yes, sir, I do like to talk.
Is that a virtue or a vice?
Well, I have to admit, I've always wanted to be the quiet, mysterious type. Only I couldn't keep my mouth shut long enough.
Would you punch yourself in a street fight, Mr. Burgess?
No, sir.
Then don't punch yourself in a word fight. You don't have to make fun of yourself. Use your humor against your opponent. Mr. Farmer.
Yes, sir.
Happy Mr. Farmer. Tell us one thing we don't know about your father.
He was the first Negro PhD.
One thing we don't know about your father, Mr. Farmer.
He walked from Florida to Massachusetts to go to college at Boston University. He graduated magna cum laude.
Mr. Lowe. Tell us about your father.
Why don't you tell us something about your father?
We're trying to get to know each other, Mr. Lowe.
I was trying to get to know you, Mr. Tolson.
Well, I'm not the one on the debate team.
Are we not engaged in a debate right now?
All right. I'll take the affirmative. Take the meanest, most restless nigger. Strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male niggers, female niggers, and nigger infants. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a horse facing in opposite direction, set him on fire, and beat both horses until they tear him apart in front of the male, female, and nigger infants. Bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger males within an inch of their life. Do not kill them, but put the fear of God in them, for they can be useful for future breeding. Anybody know who Willie Lynch was? Anybody? Raise your hand. No one? He was a vicious slave owner in the West Indies. The slave masters in the colony of Virginia were having trouble controlling their slaves, so they sent for Mr. Lynch to teach them his methods. The word lynching came from his last name. His methods were very simple, but they were diabolical. Keep the slave physically strong, but psychologically weak and dependent on the slave master. Keep the body, take the mind. I and every other professor on this campus are here to help you to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind. Because obviously, you have lost it.
Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion stuns the nation and pushes the South's slave policing system to its limits.
For white Virginians and white slaveholders across the South, it was a shock.
The paranoia shoots off the scale. 50 dead today, how many dead tomorrow?
In Southampton County, Virginia, Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher, has his own interpretation of the Bible. He believes that God has chosen him to avenge the sins of slavery. As Turner makes his rounds preaching in the fields, he quietly enlists other slaves to his cause. For months, the men meet secretly, conspiring on the plans of their uprising. In the early morning hours of August 21st, 1831, Turner and his men launch one of the largest slave rebellions in American history. The rebels move from home to home, killing every white person they meet. As they advance towards the nearby town of Jerusalem, more recruits join them. The local slave patrols have failed to uncover Turner's plot. So the militia is called out to track down and kill the rebels. For 36 hours, the rebellion rages on. Church bells ring out in distress. Rumors spread among whites that the whole southern slave population has finally exploded in revolt, and that the British are invading to liberate the slaves. As panic swells, the United States government provides important military support. And that support is ensured by slaveholder power.
Don't forget that slavery is protected not only by the slaveholder, not only by the local militia or the state militia, but also by the full force of the military might of the United States of America. Except for that, slavery would not have been possible in the South.
As the hunt for Nat Turner and his men continues, 800 U.S. troops join 2,000 local militiamen. Within a week, the rebellion is squashed. More than 50 rebels are captured. Nearly 60 white men, women, and children have been killed. The violence doesn't fully subside until Nat Turner is captured 2 months later on October 31st, not by a patrol or slave catcher, but by a farmer, by accident. Turner is tried, hanged, and skinned. In all, the state executes 55 black people for conspiring with Turner.
The Turner Rebellion frightened whites literally out of their minds, and yet even that wasn't strong enough to provoke them to get rid of slavery as an institution.
Because for slave owners, profit outweighs morality and their own safety. By 1830, nearly 2 million slaves are fueling the Southern economy, and slaveholders aren't about to give up their free labor. And still, slaves run, and slave hunters expand their networks for tracking them.
I just want to get your thoughts on Trump, the Trump phenomenon, and what you can tell about the rest of the world by looking at their reaction to Trump.
Well, Trump is the equivalent of a Hollywood actor on the movie screen. And the anti-Trumps people are other actors in the movie. And so humanities, those people who get caught in it, yeah, he's the baddie, he is. He's the baddie in this movie, that Trump, he's the baddie. Oh, no, he's the goodie, he is the person I like, right? It's a movie. And while we are focusing on this, again, this minutiae of Trump, anti-Trump, left, right, and all this nonsense that we get caught into, Silicon Valley's doing what it is doing in terms of destroying freedom of information and driving on behalf of things like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, this AI transhumanist agenda. It's a diversion. And, you know, just a quick one. I talk about this hidden hand. These here today, gone tomorrow politicians are just that. Here today, gone tomorrow. What we need to look at is that which is always there, because that's where the power is. That's what pushes this agenda on, no matter who's in power, who's the president, what party, whatever. A quick example. In September 2000, an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century published a document calling for the American government to, quote, fight and decisively win multiple theater wars, to bring about a series of regime changes. And it named the countries that they wanted to regime change: Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, North Korea, China. The people who published that document included Donald Rumsfeld, who a few months later would be Secretary of State for Defense in the Bush administration, Paul Wolfowitz, who would be his deputy at the Pentagon, Dick Cheney, who would be de facto president under Bush for 2 terms, Dov Zakheim, who would control the entirety of the Pentagon budget in that same period. In that document in September 2000, they said that this process of transformation, all these regime changes, would necessarily be slow, this is the quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year to the month after that document was published, 9 months after the people that wrote it came to power in the Bush administration, the United States had, in September 2001, what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. As a result of that, this process of regime change was triggered by the so-called war on terror justified by 9/11, which the official story of 9/11 is tragically laughable when you break it down and you see how the contradictions. Anyway, this is where I'm going in terms of the politicians and Trump. First man in, of course, officially, George W. Bush. They went into Afghanistan. Then, with Tony Blair lying about weapons of mass destruction, they went into Iraq. And the reason they lied about weapons of mass destruction is because Iraq was on this list of regime change. They didn't have an excuse, so they made one up. And by the way, let us not forget, people now, including even the mainstream media, accept that they were lied to over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which led to a catastrophic invasion and the catastrophe that has followed. Let us not forget that the very same people, not the same agencies, the same governments, the same personalities that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they knew they weren't, were the same people that gave us the official story of 9/11. Okay, so the list, Iraq. Then they go into Libya, also on the list. But now Bush is gone, Blair's gone. Now it's Barack Obama. He's a Democrat, not a Republican. And it's David Cameron. He's a conservative, not the illusory of Labour, Blair. But now they're going into another one on the list, and then into Syria. And again, creating mayhem and catastrophe. I mean, you know, Libya is one of the great world's basket cases now, when it was the highest per capita income country in Africa before they sent the boys in. And so that was Obama and that was Cameron. Then we come to Trump. And Trump is now, yes, he's supposed to be a Republican, but he's the anti-establishment man. He's a maverick. A maverick who was going to drain the swamp and handed the American economy to Goldman Sachs from day one or before day one. But who is he demonizing now? He's demonizing Iran, and he's demonizing North Korea, other people on the list, other countries on the list. So this list from September 2000 has been ticked off all the way through these different politicians and different parties and different personalities. So no matter who's coming and going or who you're going to vote for, you know, it's like some Americans say, you know, it don't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. Yes, the secret government. Because America's a wonderful example of how it works. So it works the same everywhere. During the Bush administration, and a Republican administration like now, you have this group that control the Republican Party that are acknowledged by the mainstream media. They're called neoconservatives or neocons. They were the people that created the Project for the New American Century, that wrote that document in September 2000. And then in the Democratic Party, you have another group very much the same that I call the democons. This is your George Soros's and Zbigniew Brzezinski before he died this year, and others. The key is that if you go one step back in the shadows, the neocons and the democons answer to the same master. So it means that whether it's one or the other, Republican or Democrat, that is always in power. And that's what's been driving this agenda of ticking these countries off as these people come in.
Continue watching this fascinating conversation for free by clicking on the link below to visit our website, learn from the best minds in the world, and connect with a community of passionate people building the best versions of themselves. Just click on the link below, and I'll see you on the inside.